Okay, so this next one, you guys, it's a little bit of a different genre, but also Sicilian, Jen. I think you'll like this one. A couple of days ago, I joined Judith Polgar's camp. I don't know, did you know that she was doing a lecture like a 1 day sort of lecture series on the Sicilian Defense?
I did know that. Tatev told me.
Oh, yeah, Tatev was there, right? So I joined that. I mean, I was just really interested since I'm a Sicilian player, and I told all my students about it that qualified for the class, like all my over 1800s. A couple of them were girls, you know. So after looking at Judith's games, which were just like amazing, amazing games, I started thinking, okay, like let's about the themes that she mentioned in her games, like. And I was like, let me find more examples on those themes for my students to help them, you know, play the Sicilian even better. So this is how I found this game, basically inspired by some things that I had seen in Judith's lecture. So it's Black's turn to move. And we are looking for kind of direction for Black. This is a pretty typical Sicilian position. Lots of possible moves for Black. What to do with Black? I mean, if you want to play a standard normal move, the move Bishop E7 will spring to mind, right? Because like we just got a complete development. So I would say that's pretty good. I mean, you can certainly play Bishop E7. You have to be ready for the move Bishop takes F6. I mean, because now you're either going to have to take the pawn structure with the doubled pawns, or you're going to have to sack a pawn, which by the way is also one of my, you know, one of the themes I like. In the Sicilian, it's the sacrifice of this pawn for the bishop pair compensation, including in the end games. And actually, I checked this with the computer, and it was saying that like Black could take with the bishop, and that he would have compensation in this position. But still, you know, Bishop E7 is not the most interesting option. Another popular option people chose was this one. Mm-hmm. Very typical square for the knight in the Sicilian. I mean, you got knight c4 ideas, but you're really inviting white to play f4. And for that reason, that really wouldn't be my choice. Of course, you know, you can play knight g6, and that's was the way one of the students' games went, where white actually doesn't really have a great square for that bishop, wound up taking it and playing just like that. But, you know, this is a pretty strange position for the queen, and there's always going to be ideas of f5, so white's got some sort of initiative here. This move also is a bit problematic, because after bishop takes, you know, there's these e5 ideas coming up. If you take with the rook, there's some kind of like knight d2, and then with e5 ideas. So I think Black's position is they're not really ready to just like start hopping around with their knight with no development. But Black does have a very nice strategy here, completely in accordance with the spirit of the Sicilian defense, which is this move g5.
Oh, right? Yes, because, you know, it's funny. I read Judith's book recently for my friend Ben Johnson's podcast. I almost called him Ponson. But famously, Judith played the game that she won her Grandmaster title. She had this beautiful g5 move, right?
Yeah, she did. She did show that game in the camp. She had a game, you know, it was absolutely gorgeous, where she fought for that square by like sacking, I think, 1 or 2 pawns against Alexei Shirov. And, you know, after seeing that game, I was like, I got to show my students more examples of like why the e5 square is so important in the Sicilian, that Black, you know, is willing to like kind of play these non-standard moves and not, you know, castling their king, leaving their king in the center, just to get control over that square. And in general, I mean, of course, you know, like the way to achieve harmony is to fight for good squares like that for your pieces. So that's why it's such an important sort of thing to try to accomplish, right? If you only have your pieces average, you're never going to get these beautiful dominating positions. So this square, middle of the board, functions pretty much as an outpost. I once had someone, like a student of mine around 1800, kind of tell me like, well, can't the knight just get captured? Well, not really, because Black is only getting stronger in the center that way. Look at all of that control, while white's knights are actually quite limited in their movement. Black's bishop on f8 is potentially going to be a very strong piece. So it's not as simple for white as just being like, oh, I'm just going to take the strong knight. Because yeah, you can take it, but you're giving black other kinds of strengths in their position. So the computer played f4, which makes...
Yeah, that's what I was worried about. I looked at this and I thought f4 was scary.
Yep, definitely. I mean, white opens up the F file for their rook, but on the other hand, they open up the G file for black. So we'll see. Black goes queen b6. Now the knight on f6 is hanging, so we need to protect it from bishop takes e5. White goes queen e1, bishop c6. And that was another thing that came up in Judith's lecture, is how powerful, you know, that bishop can be on the open diagonal in the Sicilian. White decided to take the knight here. Yeah, it was a big decision. I mean, that capture, yeah, it opens up the rook, gets rid of our strong knight, but definitely not a decision that white can make lightly. And white plays queen g3, attacking our pawn. So the obvious move here is queen c7, right? Just defending our pawn. I don't think we can capture this one because we're just going to have too many loose pieces in this position. Our bishop is hanging, our rook is hanging, so that's not in the picture. But the computer didn't play queen c7, Jen. Computer surprised us. So he played h5. Okay, I mean, that move is desirable for black, for sure. Like, he wants to drive that pawn further and try to weaken up white's king. But the question is, what happens when white takes the pawn? So this took me a little bit of time to figure out what this was about, because that's a healthy pawn in the center, and that's a really excellent queen for white. So why is black just letting white do that? And then plus rook takes f6 as a threat, right? But white didn't take the pawn, so we know there's something wrong with that. After thinking for a little while, I was like, is it really just that? Is it just queen c7? Like, we're going to play for positional compensation, having sacked the center pawn? I mean, we got to challenge our opponent's queen on e5. And we got to get rid of rook f6. And, you know, they can't really avoid the queen trade, because, like, if they move, we're going to get a bunch of tempos. Our knight's going to come into g4 once that queen is gone. But this position, yeah, it is the move that the computer was planning. And black has full compensation here for the pawn, which is another, I mean, this whole theme is just so common in the Sicilian, you know, the compensation based on the strong bishop pair, the, this pawn is weak, we've got knight g4 ideas, eventually maybe the bishop d6 can come around. So yeah, that was the reason that black just didn't even bother to guard that pawn. You know, again, the power of a square like that, it's pretty huge. And white's knights, white's bishop, these are just pieces that are not really emanating too much power here. So h5, all right. The pawn was not captured. White played h3 to stop, you know, black from driving that pawn in all the way. And now black defended the pawn. White brought in the rook, h4, queen f2. Okay, so this part was, we managed to sort of understand. Now it gets really, really interesting what black does from here. I mean, his knight is pinned on the f file. So f7 is a very sensitive square. Notice how the king is still in the center, guys. You know, Judith showed us a bunch of games, and in none of them did black castle kingside, Jen. You know, which I can't even say that's common for the Sicilian, but for somehow in her lecture, the black king either stayed in the center, went queenside. I mean, her games were, of course, special kind of games that she chose, but, you know, the king is not necessarily castling kingside for black in the Sicilian, and this is just one of those times. He's pretty safe in the center because a lot of pawns are blocking the e file, right? At the same time, you got to keep your eye on him, because, you know, one wrong step and, you know, there's checkmate. So what to do for black? Well, black moved his bishop back. So why? I don't know. We'll see. What should white do? Well, notice, guys, how these squares are all off limits. And that's, the control of center is a big thing in chess. And this bishop on e2, also not doing much. So that's black's, that's kind of black's compensation here for the fact that his king is in the center. It's that, white's pieces really can't do anything right now. Okay, so white played queen e3. Now black goes queen b8, and things started to become a little more clear about why that move bishop a8 was played. So black has put another thematic Sicilian idea on the board. So look at that, guys. Like, he had the c file blocked. He just calmly unblocks it with 2 consecutive moves, and now that rook is threatening to take the knight. And you know that when you get your knight there, and then you get your knight there, you are going to have full compensation for the exchange. So white can't allow it. White played bishop d3. So that move shows that white knows that the e4 pawn is getting vulnerable. So now the knight is free to move. So now we're going to g3. So white can't allow us in there. And this is where things get really spectacular. I mean, like, how much more pressure can black put on white's position? White looks like everything's in the center, everything, the rooks are on the center files, the queen's in the center, the minor pieces. Like, what else can black really throw at white in this position? Well, he throws one more thing. And this move was pretty spectacular. And by the way, Judith also had a game against Siju, where she played a move like that. It was very nice. Well, if black gets the pawn to f4, black is just going to win positionally. So huge space advantage, shutting down white's pieces. So of course, white cannot let that happen, and white has to deal with that pawn. So either this is going to be good for us, or it's like a total mistake, right? Because I mean, we just blew up our own pawn structure, our king safety, everything. Why? Well, we did it to open up that bishop, first of all. So now what? How do we use that bishop on the diagonal? Do we go rook g8, or do we go queen b7? Well, what's the difference between those 2 moves? They try to do the same thing, but they're quite different. If we go here, we are probably just going to lose, because our opponent's going to block us. He's going to neutralize our bishop, and then we're going to be playing this position with our king hopeless in the center. So computer, of course, is not going to let his bishop get neutralized. Threatens mate, and then attacks like that. So you see, guys, the game has turned very dynamic. It kind of went from positional, we're talking about outposts, to black just going after white's king, using those open files and diagonals. So now, if rook g1, black has a nice way to win like that, with the idea of, getting in the rook and threatening rook h3 mate. Like, for example, if white blocks, we can just trade everything, and that pawn move sort of finishes things off, because the rook barges in, the bishop is threatening mate, so it's not exactly an even endgame here. I guess on this move, which I didn't look at before, even bishop f8 looks pretty good, because when the rook comes into c2, it's going to be really powerful. So a computer as white came up with a good idea, I think. Instead of playing this passive rook g1, he goes knight d2. It's a really clever move. So he doesn't even defend g2. He so much wants to put a bishop there. So much wants to, block off black's queen and bishop. And if we take on g2, things are not so clear. So computer made one more excellent move. In chess, this is the key, guys, is that you got to make your moves stopping your opponent's ideas. He just goes back with his knight, which is really surprising. Because I mean, we were looking at ways to get the knight in there, and now he just goes back.
Amazing.
It is an amazing move. I mean, it's the combination of black having built up like their position and they're very aggressive, and yet they keep stopping their opponent's ideas. I mean, that's what gives this game so much power, you know? And so we want to take on G2. That's the big threat. But the funny thing is, it's not the only threat, because there's one more thing going on here, which is that, well, rook takes G2 is possible, but there's like some kind of, they can still somehow block us with maybe even rook F3 in this position. So black has one more idea, and that idea is this move. And very surprisingly, the bishop is just trapped. And so white had to like sack the bishop for the pawn, and somehow they wound up losing. I mean, we can stop it at this point because now black is already better. And I mean, I think it's pretty funny the way this king has managed to still be dry, you know? I mean, like one rook over here, the other rook over there. I mean, the king got opened up, and yet he's always been kind of safe, right? Like white's never even been able to get a single check on him.
That was amazing. Great games. Thank you so much for showing us both of these games and giving us some insight into how you use computer games to come up with chess lessons. I don't know a lot of people who do that.
Yeah, it's something, well, first of all, I mean, you see why, right? Because when you have a game like that, it's like you get everything. You get like the positional ideas, you get the tactics. I mean, and they're deep. They're deep, and they sort of unveil the beauty of chess, that it's even hard. I mean, we know all of these ideas, right? But like for one game to have like everything like that, it's certainly, it would be very difficult to ask that of like a human game. But in computer chess, you can actually find these examples all the time. The mix of the harmony creation, the deep prophylaxis, like, and then all the unusual like kind of tactics. So
yeah, and the reason also is that a lot of the sharp kids today, they study so much, and some of them that they have really good memories. Some stuff that you try to show them they've already seen, but with games like this, like you're always going to be completely fresh in their mind.
that's true, Jen. You know, computer games, you know, you can get like 100 new games played per day. So like every time you show a computer game, like the chance that anyone's seen it is like zero. Just zero. I have these tricky little ways, Jen, of how I find things that I'm interested in. And this is something, you know, I just picked up, of course, when not when I was a player, but when I started teaching more. So, like, for example, how do I find this game? I search for, let's say, like a pawn on G5 and a knight on E5. I put in those two pieces, right? And then I can even narrow it down by searching like B20 to B99. So I'm going to get like the kind of opening where I think it's most likely, and then I just, okay, you know, I'll have to go through the games to see like what's the most instructive. But you know, certain positional ideas like, you know, like an outpost, if I want to find a knight on E5 or D4, or like a bishop being on B7 and opening up with D4, like I'll just search for those elements, and I'll try to like wade through that, and sometimes you come up with these diamonds.
That's amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Irina Krush. And you are giving chess classes right now. Where should people find out about you? I know you keep a pretty low profile social media wise, but your lessons?
Yeah, I'm so modest about that, Jen. I've never even posted about the fact that we have, you know, camps and classes on my Facebook page. But yeah, well, right now, you know, we do chess camps together with the Marshall Chess Club. You can find that at marshallchessclub.org. You can also visit our website, GM Chess Inc. So to find out about our classes. So we're doing a lot of stuff online these days.
Great. Thank you, Irina. So great to have you for both our YouTube audience and our Girls Club. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jen. It was really fun being with you.